Hello class. I wrote a lot of notes for this video. As you can see, I probably could have just written a discussion board, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit. I really enjoyed the essay as well as this week's films. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, I know some of you guys have our short form media class with Professor Russell together. And he talked a little bit when we were in person for the residency. He talked about a third thing. And I think that really relates into Sobchack, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that correctly, but Sobchack's essay this week, because I feel like she talks a lot, or they talk a lot about the third thing as it relates to like the film noir and where the film noir takes place. And so I thought it was interesting because yeah, it relates to like the real time like war occurrences. We're talking about this sort of story, and usually, as we can see, it's usually like a love story or like some story of like super like espionage, that sort of thing. And so it sort of relates to, I feel like, a third thing in that we're talking about something else, but we're actually talking about war and what it means to, I guess, battle out these different things, what it means to not trust each other. And so I really thought that that idea, when we talked about in short form media, we talked about the third thing is like, when we watched the short film Krista, and it's really talking about grief, but it's talking about, her car is breaking down. That's the third thing. I feel like the film noir space sort of relates to a third thing in that way. And then Touch of Evil, I felt like was a stand-in for discussing like a distrust of like foreign ideas and the loss of or the threat to the all-American sort of family unit that was happening in the post-war period. And then we also see Sobchak. She talks about horses and, or not horses, sorry, houses. She talks about houses, and there are no permanent houses shown in Touch of Evil, which I think is very interesting. We get the hotel where they're staying, we get the other hotel. Like, we just sort of bounce around from hotels. Nothing's permanent. And I think that's really interesting that Sobchak mentioned that because, yeah, in Touch of Evil, there are no like houses. We don't see like a home. Like, in fact, the main character, her name was Susan. She wants to go home, and her husband's like, "No, we have to stay out and like work. Basically, we have to stay out and we have to figure this out." And so I think that's really interesting. And in fact, too, the only permanent home is sort of like home is like Tanya's place that his name Hank Quinlan that he goes to a lot. Like that's pretty much the only home. Like if you're looking for Hank, you can always find him at Tanya's place. And I find that fascinating because, it's across the border, it's like this Mexican place where, they're like not sort of trusting it. Everybody's always like things over the border, it's super dirty. It's like, it just seems like this place that is like depicted as untrustworthy. But that's the only place that we find, of course, Hank, which makes a lot of sense. Um, and that's also where he houses like a lot of his looked down on like characteristics, like drinking and smoking. Like he goes there and he drinks and he smokes and he has sex or whatnot. And I just think that's really interesting. And then I also found it interesting that the second act of the film is very like dry and like desolate. And as you can see, Susan and her husband, who she just got married to, they're not doing anything. Like, she calls him and she's like trying to like be intimate or whatnot and like whatnot. And he's basically like, I gotta work. And so, that doesn't end up working. And they're in like this dry, desolate space. So duh, no life, no water. Um, and there's like a calling back to like romance and intimacy and lack thereof throughout the entire film. And so, Sobchak also talks about a note that Dana Poland makes in the essay. Sobchak talks about this, and Dana Poland specifically says environments don't reflect back to a character's personality or values. And I feel like this is noteworthy because Susan is trying to get intimacy out of her husband, and it's not working. That's why she's trying to go home. She's trying to basically build this like intimate like family unit life with her husband, and it's not working. Like she's calling out and she's having all these values of like, oh, that she wants to go home, she wants to be married to her husband, and it's not working because he just rather work and focus on like being like the sleuth and being intelligent, cerebral sort of sleuth. And so I found that really interesting as well because it's not the desolate value and the desolate land is not relating back to Susan's values. um, mm, mm, mm. So subject also talks about items that don't belong in certain areas. Like she talks a lot about the lemonade pitcher in the movie The Killers, which I know we didn't watch this week, but I thought that in Touch of Evil, of course, the thing that sort of doesn't belong, or not Touch of Evil, um, it was Chinatown. The thing that sort of doesn't belong in Chinatown is the water. The water is like being moved. The water is being put in all the wrong areas. It's being dumped at night. It's like, it's really weird. It's always dry where the water's being dumped, and it's like, it's not helping the actual people that need it. And so I found this very interesting because if you really think about it, if we take that metaphor that I just sort of established of the water relating to like intimacy and like sex and everything in Touch of Evil, then I feel like you can do the same in Chinatown. And we know who the water is like primarily owned by, the corrupt people that the water is primarily owned by in Chinatown. It's, Mr. Mulray, and it's especially Noah Cross. And I feel like that correlation is, of course, it's very disgusting. If you think about it in the sense of Noah Cross, who is a disgusting individual, it's like he owns the water and he shouldn't. He's doing corrupt things with it. He's making sure that corrupt things are done with it. And so I really thought that that was interesting as well. And then also they find Noah Cross's glasses in the water. Like they find it in this salt water. The salt water that's been used to kill Mr. Mulray. And so, and it's called back to by the gardener too, who's working. He says that it's not good for the grass, but it sounds like he's saying glass, like glasses. And so I found that really interesting because again, water where it doesn't belong, these glasses where they don't belong. Noah Cross, he's supposed to be old and like rich and like wise and wealthy. And there's glasses, his glasses, which, also represent like wisdom and like knowledge and very like maturity most of the time. They are found, in this water, again, this water where it does not, where they don't belong. And so I just found it very interesting. I found that, of course, like I said, of course, it's very gross. If you follow, the metaphor of Touch of Evil, lack of sex and lack of intimacy, being that desolate, dry area to, water and the ownership, who owns it in Chinatown. I think it's interesting and, of course, gross as well. But thanks for listening to my TED Talk. Went on way too long, but hope you enjoyed. I enjoyed this week's movies, especially Chinatown. I thought it was really good. That ending is horrifying and tragic, but really great movie.